Hi, we're here with Representative Ron Miller from York County. He's the majority chair of the House Environmental Resources and Energy Committee. He's also the prime sponsor of House Bill 343, which would, for the first time, set drinking water well standards in Pennsylvania. Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for setting aside a little time for us.
My pleasure.
Wanted to ask you, how did you get involved in this issue of drinking water well standards?
As you will remember, probably 14 years ago, another member, former State Representative Mary Ann Daly, had introduced a bill to establish water well standards for the state of Pennsylvania. At the time, it was a very interesting experience. She was demonized over that across the state, and there was a loud outcry. People said things that absolutely weren't true, that we were going to tax your usage of well water for your personal consumption. It was just a bad experience for her. She chose not to remain in the House after 2 or 3 terms, but I promised her at the time, I said, when the time's right, I will reintroduce that legislation because I felt it was very important. Waited for a while. As you know, there were 2 studies done, statewide studies. So we wanted to wait for the first study results to come back before we reintroduce that bill. Maybe I should back up a second and say it turns out that the executive director of the State Water Well Association and the president, father and son team, their business is in my district. And I actually had them call one year and ask me to come speak to the association, and I was speaking to them, and they said, well, why haven't you introduced this bill? And I said, well, we're waiting for the time to be right. Is it right now? And they suggested at that point that we wait until the statewide water resources study was done. And then, of course, as you know, after that, the Marcellus Shale study was done. So we had 2 studies that basically said we absolutely had to do this.
Can you give us a basic outline of what the bill does?
It basically authorizes the Environmental Quality Board to establish minimum standards for construction of a water well. It also will require decommissioning of a water well if you're going to abandon it. One of my major concerns always has been what happens with a well once you abandon it. How do you abandon a well? One of the concerns is this, and I always equate it to this. If you cut yourself, if you have an open sore on your body, it's a way that bacteria can get into your body. You have to cover that. That's why we put a Band-Aid on it until a scab forms. It's to protect against bacteria. That's been my concern with a water well. If you don't decommission it properly, if you don't seal it, it is a conduit excuse me, for contaminants to enter our water aquifers. And nobody wants that. We all need to know that when we drill a well, we're going to have pure water for drinking. So I've always felt that it was very important that we decommission a well properly. But even more than that, we've had experiences in the farm community. There's always a conflict, okay, with private water well owners and surrounding activities. If you don't put a well in properly, if it's not grouted properly, you basically leave a conduit for surface runoff to get into the aquifer. And what happens then? We've had instances where people have alleged that the farmer is polluting their well. And sometimes there might be some validity to that. I'm not going to say there never is. But by the same token, if you haven't installed your well properly, that's hard to allege. It really is.
And a lot of people in Pennsylvania rely on well water. And I think a lot of people don't really realize that.
Yeah, many people. It's interesting. I live in the borough of Jacobus. Because I am so far off of the water main, even I guess 99.9% of the borough of Jacobus has water, public water. I have a well. Many people, many of our neighbors rely on water wells for their water source. We have, I don't know the exact statistic, but we probably have more water wells and private water wells in Pennsylvania than any other state or almost any other state. What's interesting is we're one of only 2 states in the country that don't have minimum water well construction standards. My understanding is the other one is Alaska.
Now, your legislation passed the House in July. The hope is, of course, that the Senate will take it up. Do you see that as something that gets done by the end of this year?
I'm quite hopeful. We've waited long enough. We needed, and the Marcellus Shale study pointed this out. We need this to assure that our aquifers are protected. One of the conflicts we have with drilling for Marcellus Shale for gas is the fact that we have many wells that were not installed properly. We've had natural gas occurring in people's well water for years. If you install the well properly, the potential for conflict is minimized. Now, we're not going back and requiring anybody to redo their wells, but hopefully going forward, we do it right and really minimize that need. So I'm very hopeful that the Senate will take this up. We'll get it passed and give Pennsylvania residents some sense of security going forward, that water wells will not only be drilled and installed properly with the proper grouting, casing, cap. I mean, I don't know. Many of us have been on sites and seen where the well cap is a coffee can turned upside down over the well, or else, that doesn't protect against rodents, a 5-gallon bucket. So we're just looking for minimum standards to make sure that the wells are installed properly. But more than that, once you're going to abandon the well, let's make sure that it is plugged properly to protect that aquifer for future generations.
Chairman Miller, thank you very much for taking time to describe this important legislation.
Thank you. My pleasure.